Hi, my name's Kevin Hicks. Welcome to the History Squad. Now, today's video, we're going to have a little look into Edward of Woodstock. Edward, Prince of Wales, or commonly known as Edward the Black Prince, hero of the battles of Crécy, Poitiers. He was quite something. Now, imagine if he'd have outlived his father and had become the King of England. How different would history be? The 100 Years' War, would it have lasted so long? Would we have had the Wars of the Roses? So we're going to have a look into who he really was and why he mattered and what might have happened if he'd have become the King of England. Edward, Prince of Wales, born on the 15th of June, 1330 in Oxfordshire, in fact, in the town of Woodstock, where there was a palace in those days. It no longer exists. Apparently, Blenheim Palace is built upon the site. He was born into the Plantagenet family, and his father was none other than Edward III. His mother was Philippa of Hainault. Through his paternal line, he could link his lineage straight in to the French royal family. He had as much French blood in his veins as he did English. In fact, his first language was French. His second language was English, and he had a smattering, apparently, of Latin. He was not the tallest. He was around 5'6", 5'7", and of average build. So when it come to combat, he wasn't the giant of a man that I always imagined him to be. So his prowess on the battlefield was sheer skill and courage. Now, when his father, Edward III, invades France, it's not France as we know it today. It was a divided country. You had duchies, counties, principalities. An interesting point, counties ruled by a count. Duchies ruled by a duke. Principalities ruled by a prince. And we're going to have a look to see where our prince, Edward, Prince of Wales, fits into this great picture of history. So Edward of Woodstock, being the son of the king, Edward III, will be trained and groomed to become the king's successor, to become the king in his own right eventually. As a very young boy, he was dressed in the finest clothing, the best fashions, the best surroundings. His life was quite sumptuous because he was being groomed to be this king, to look like a prince, to look like a king. At the age of 14, in fact, his father, Edward III, went across to France on several occasions, and each time he went, the young Edward was left, 14 years of age, in charge. Well, he was called the guardian of the kingdom. Nominally in charge, he had lots of advisors, but this young man was trained in diplomacy, how to rule a country. He was trained how to fight, his martial arts, jousting and all that kind of stuff. He was made Prince of Wales in 1343, and he was knighted just at the very beginning of the Crécy campaign in 1346. So at the age of 16, this freshly knighted Prince of Wales was to lead the vanguard of his father's army at the Battle of Crécy, 26th of August, 1346. So the young prince is in command of the right wing of his father's army, the vanguard. They're going to be right at the front. Although it's the right wing, they're going to be the first that's going to be hit by any charging cavalry. They commanded 800 men-at-arms. That's 800 armoured men, 2,000 archers and 1,000 Welsh foot soldiers. It's interesting to point that the Prince of Wales had his own livery amongst his troops, the green and the white. The green is on the right, the white is on the left. So, in fact, he started off pretty much the first uniform in the English army. I love these asides. So they stand ready. Now, if you want to see the full video on the Battle of Crécy, have a look in my playlist, because I've already done it. But the young prince is looking down the hill, and he watches the French send their crossbowmen forward. These are the famous Genoese. As the Genoese shoot, their arrows are landing short, or their bolts are landing short. Apparently, it had been raining quite badly on their crossbows, and their strings are stretched. As they approach, the bowmen of England and Wales don't shoot. They hold back until the Genoese are well and truly in range. And then all hell breaks loose. Thousands upon thousands of arrows pour into the Genoese, who were without their shields, their pavise. They were way back in the baggage train. As the Genoese begin to pull back, the Duke d'Alençon and his cavalry, eager to get at the English, decide to charge forward. They charge down their own crossbowmen. So when they come through and out the other side, their ranks are ragged. So as they come up the hill, it is not a cohesive charge, and just in front of the king and the prince's positions, the bowmen had dug thousands of holes. Horses' hooves go down into the holes, cartwheel through the air. It must have been carnage. But eventually, they do plough straight in to the Prince of Wales, and there is a fight. And we know that at one stage, the prince himself was knocked to the ground. He put up a heck of a fight, and that's just it. This is a 16-year-old boy who has lived a life of luxury. He's not the giant that you would think. So his courage and his skill shines through here, but eventually he's overwhelmed, he's knocked to the ground. One account I read, he was actually concussed, unconscious. His standard bearer stands over him and fights the French back. As soon as the prince wakes up, he's up and he's back into the fray. When the battle was done, many thousands of French lay dead upon the battlefield for just a few hundred English and Welsh. So it was a great English victory, the Battle of Crécy. In front of the prince's right wing, many hundreds of French lay dead, amongst them the Duke of Alençon, one of the top French commanders. The prince had done incredibly well. He had stood his ground, even though he'd been knocked on the head, shall we say. But after the battle, he walks the field with his father, and they walk up to where there is a notable casualty. John of Luxembourg, King of Bohemia. This old man hated the English so much and was loyal to the French, but he couldn't fight because he was blind. So he'd had his horse tethered to his squires, and they charged together to strike one last blow against the accursed English. But he was killed. And the sight of them all lying there in a heap, their horses still tethered together, must have really struck deep into the heart of the Prince of Wales, because he knelt down and he took from the King of Bohemia a feather. We know those feathers today. There are 3 of them, the 3 feathers of the Prince of Wales. Or more familiar, they are the 3 feathers on the Welsh rugby shirt. So right after the Battle of Crécy, the king lays siege to the town of Calais, and the young prince is there. Now, once the town surrenders, the young prince is sent on what's called a chevauchée, 30 miles around Calais, stripping the land bare, burning it. And the idea behind this was that so any money, anything that could be used by the resident king or baron was destroyed. That was the idea. It was showing the people that, hey, look, we're in charge. Your king can't defend you. Horrible, terrible thing, but it's what was done. And the young Prince of Wales was getting the hang of it. And he was in Calais again when a French relief force in 1349 tried to retake Calais. There was subterfuge and bribery and all that, but the French were sussed out, and the king, he went too soon and could have been captured. However, his son apparently came to the rescue. Now, it was after this, in 1350, August 1350, the Battle of Winchelsea, and it shows you how versatile these knights were. It's a battle at sea. And the young prince, although he was with his father, was on his own ship, and he had his younger brother, John of Gaunt, with him. But this ship had been attacked by a larger Spanish vessel. Grappling hooks had been thrown over, and there was a heck of a fight. And the young prince's ship was so full of holes, it was beginning to sink. And if it hadn't have been for Henry of Grosmont, Earl of Leicester, coming alongside the other side and attacking the Spanish from that side, the young prince would quite easily have perished, because as they stepped off their ship onto the Spanish ship, the English ship sank. Now, the English have captured the Spanish ship, so what's the first thing they do? Throw the crew overboard. Take command. Some years later, August 1356, the Prince of Wales is ordered by his father, Edward III, King of England, to launch a great chevauchée into the centre of France. And don't forget, the chevauchée. You burn, destroy, loot as much as you can. Deny the use of the land to the king that owns the land. That's basically it. They did burn so many towns, capture so many castles, destroy so many lives. It makes me think that perhaps this was where the seeds were sown for the name, the Black Prince, this dread prince. Well, eventually, King John II of France was forced into action, and he raises a great army and pursues Edward, Prince of Wales, and his army. He intercepts it and brings the Chevauchée to a halt at a place known as Poitiers, which results in the great battle there, 19th of September, 1356. Now, we've covered all of these battles, Crécy, Poitiers, and Nájera, on full videos, and the link is in the description. So back to the Battle of Poitiers. The English and Gascon army are greatly outnumbered. The French have basically got us. But it's not just the French, it's the French and the Germans and the Genoese. Quite something, isn't it? The English have positioned themselves at the top of a hill, but it's kind of a three-sided sloped hill, and the French are at the bottom. They're going to have to do a real climb at the bottom. The English have positioned themselves with the woods behind them. Their baggage train is down the hill in the woods, and there are thick hedges. Now, I didn't appreciate until I had a real good look. These hedges weren't just like your farmer's hedge that you see sometimes. These were really dense, almost small copse in their own right, with gaps, and the English positioned themselves in the gaps. The king, who had some great advisors, remember the earls and the knights that supported him, Warwick and the like, they have a reserve. So as the French are coming up, the bowmen on one side are shooting to little effect, but the bowmen on the other side, on the right flank of the French, I think these were commanded by the Earl of Warwick, are actually jumping from tump to tump of grass into a marsh. So you can't attack them. Now, the French send forward their Genoese, but the French plan is really good. As the Genoese crossbowmen with their pavise, they make a stand, they start to shoot. The bowmen of England and Wales shooting at them are quite ineffective because of the pavise and the fact that these guys are armoured up. But then the crossbowmen part and move to the left and right flank of the French army, where they will harass the English. Charging through the gap now is the French heavy cavalry. These are fully armoured knights, and the horses are armoured down their face, their chest, and their forequarters, but not behind. As the bowmen on the French right flank shoot at this cavalry, the arrows apparently go up in the air and are as dangerous to friend and foe alike. But these gaps and the fact that there is so many weeds and roots and all kinds of things in front, the French charge, although it does connect, is not as good as it should be. Now, the Earl of Warwick sends his troops, his bowmen, further out into the marsh, and they are well supplied with arrows, and they can now shoot into the rear hindquarters of the horses, which are unprotected. So now you have the cavalry disengaging. That's the French cavalry. They're going to come back down the hill, but they've now got to run the gauntlet because the bowmen, they can now shoot at them as they go past. This is quite incredible, isn't it? Because meanwhile, the Prince of Wales is in the centre. There's his standard. The French can see him. And coming up the hill is the main body of the French army, commanded by King John himself, the French king, who realised that this is going to be quite a heck of a battle. So he sends his son and heir, the Dauphin, plus one of his younger sons back with the Duke of Orleans. And we don't know for sure what happened here, but about a third of the French army simply disengages and leaves the battlefield. Many of the soldiers who are part of that division leaving actually come back to support the king. So the Prince of Wales and his commanders are actually watching the French as they advance. Now, they have reserve cavalry. This is the Captal de Buche's, I think, 150 men on horseback. But they weren't professional cavalry. They weren't knights. What they were dismounted crossbowmen, some of his own men. And they were told, grab the ponies, grab a lance, follow me. So the Captal de Buche sends his little army right around the battlefield to come up behind the French. At the same time, there is a small reserve of armoured cavalry on behalf of the English, or there are English. And as the French come up, the Captal de Buch hits the French army in the rear. That causes absolute mayhem, panic, but at the rear of the French army. At the same time, this small reserve of cavalry then charges through one of the gaps and hits the French right in the flank. And they push the French over slightly to the south. Here, the French king fights on. So King John II with his son Philip, who's only 14, don't forget, are right in the middle of the press. And this young lad, he's fighting next to his father. Can you imagine that, 14 years of age? And he's calling out to his father, to your left, to your right, Papa. When all of a sudden, right next to King John, the king's standard bearer is cut down. The flag he was holding falls from his hands. That flag, that standard, was the oriflamme. So important to the French army because it was a symbol to them. No prisoners. So as that flutters to the ground now, the French army realises they are beaten. Those who can have it on their toes, but many of them will be slaughtered in the pursuit. The king, meanwhile, looks for some nobleman to surrender to. He's taken off his gauntlet, and a young French squire fighting for the English who'd lost all his estates in France, he was banished. Denis de Montbec steps forward to the king, explains who he is, and accepts the king's surrender. But no sooner has King John II of France with his young son surrendered to Denis than he is snatched away. He's roughly handled by English soldiers until the Earl of Warwick steps in and rescues the French king. Just a little interesting thing. Later on, days and days later at Bordeaux, the French king persuades the Prince of Wales that actually he was captured by Denis de Montbec. So the king ensures that this squire is paid 2,000 gold pieces to secure his estates in France. So the prince could just suddenly give out money, large amounts of money. And it's here that I start to realise I don't think the Prince of Wales really had a grasp on how much money he would spend on armour, on clothes, on ransoms. So there's a little aside here. As the battle came to its end, to its conclusion, a French prisoner was brought to the Prince of Wales. It was actually the Castellan d'Imposta. The problem with this French prisoner is before the battle, he'd been part of a cardinal's retinue, the church, to try and settle the whole business peacefully. In other words, he shouldn't have been in the battle. He was with the church. The prince was furious that a church representative should be fighting with the French king. He was so angry that he wanted to cut the head off, hack the head off this Frenchman there and then. But the great knight, Sir John Chandos, stepped in and persuaded the prince to spare him. You see, Sir John Chandos, he was a real chivalrous knight. And that Frenchman lived to see another day. After the Battle of Poitiers, the Prince of Wales, together with his army, retire upon Bordeaux. His reputation now is sealed. He's admired and feared as this great prince. And there is much feasting, celebrations and jousting. I did read that during this period of time, he spent most of the gold that he'd made on his 2 years campaign on these celebrations. But eventually, he wants to go home. And of course, he'll want to take King John II of France and his son there, Philip. But the Gascon lords are reluctant and they are moaning. So the Prince of Wales placates them with 1,000 gold crowns to just basically shut them up. And he returns to England on the 24th of May, 1357, with his prisoner, the French King John II. Over the next couple of years back in England, the Prince of Wales takes part in jousts and tournaments and festivities. He gives out lavish gifts and runs up an absolute enormous debt. Now, on October 1359, he embarks on a short campaign in Reims with his father, Edward III, which eventually results in the Treaty of Brittany and the liberation of the French king, John. He's handed back, his ransom is paid. Edward III, the king and the Prince of Wales, return to England. On October 1361, Edward, Prince of Wales, marries Joan, Countess of Kent at Windsor Castle. They will go on to have 2 children. Their youngest, Edward, will die young. I think he was only about 5. But their other son, Richard, will become Richard II of England. A whole new story. After his marriage to Joan of Kent, the Prince of Wales, Edward, was made Prince of Aquitaine and Gascony by his father, Edward III, King of England. He had control of that vast territory. And for years, he had this golden image of chivalry, this great chivalrous prince. But later in life, that image begins to fade. You know, it was the campaigning in France that made him famous, but his lavish lifestyle made him broke. Maintaining armies, paying his troops, the vast territories that he controlled were ruinously expensive. And then comes an opportunity. Pedro of Castile, also known as Pedro the Cruel, offered the prince land, gold, glory in return for military aid, so that he could reclaim his throne. The Black Prince could not resist. So, with permission from his father, the king, in 1367, Edward, Prince of Wales, led an army of English archers and Gascon knights across the Pyrenees into Spain. This was a daring expedition, thousands of men marching under the scorching Spanish sun to fight in someone else's civil war. The Battle of Nájera, April 1367. It was actually a stunning tactical victory for the Prince of Wales. His longbowmen once again decimated the enemy. And Pedro regains his throne, and Edward, Prince of Wales, is hailed once more as one of Europe's finest commanders. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Pedro, forever untrustworthy, refused to pay any money to the prince. So Edward, Prince of Wales, his treasury was empty, his armies exhausted, and they're now faced with the long march home. And it was on the march home that Edward fell ill. Modern historians reckon that it was malaria that would plague him for the rest of his life. So on the return to Aquitaine, he was no longer the shining hero of Poitiers, but a shadow of his former self, burdened heavily by debt. In 1370, the town of Limoges in Aquitaine declared for the French crown. This was a massive betrayal against Edward, the Prince of Wales, Prince of Aquitaine, don't forget. And he couldn't abide betrayal. So he decided they're going to lay siege to Limoges. But Edward was so weak, he couldn't ride his horse. This illness was really getting into him. So he was carried to the siege on a litter, basically a giant stretcher, probably with a roof over it. And he reportedly ordered that if there was resistance, they were to show no mercy. And when his forces took Limoges by force of arms, it was brutal. Let me explain rules of war when it comes to a siege. You're in a town, you're surrounded. If you surrender straight away, hey guys, look, gates are open. You will be spared. The rules of war say you will be spared. Even if you're halfway through the siege, put a white flag up. Come to terms. Look, we're sorry. Yeah, you can come in. We'll surrender. The terms will dictate then what you have to pay. However, if you fight to the bitter end, then you will pay the price. Your town could be burnt and the entire population put to the sword. You resisted and had to be taken by force of arms. Now, at the end of the siege of Limoges, it was Froissart, the famous medieval writer, who at this time was writing for the French king. He described the massacre of Limoges, how anything up to 3,000 men, women and children were put to the sword. But modern historians have had a look at this. They reevaluated it through the records, and they reckon it was as little as 300 soldiers and civilians were killed. But the damage was done. The reputation of the Prince of Wales ruined. No longer was he this chivalric champion who once spared the lives of captured kings. No, he would be remembered as the prince who put his own subjects to the sword. After the siege of Limoges, the Prince of Wales' rule, his control over Aquitaine, begins to crumble, and he returns to England a dying man. That illness that he contracted, that malaria possibly, really was getting to grips. When he returns, he finds that his father, Edward III, was also old and frail, and England was a kingdom divided. The The prince died 1376, aged but 45 years. Gosh, he'd achieved a lot, hadn't he? He was laid to rest at Canterbury Cathedral. His tomb is next to the shrine of Thomas à Becket. Just a year after the prince died, his father, Edward III, dies. So the 10-year-old son of the Prince of Wales, Richard, would actually become Richard II, King of England. Interestingly, the term Black Prince wasn't used until the 1500s. Some say it was in regards to his black armour, which has never been proven, or referring to the dark deeds of the prince like the siege of Limoges. But what if he'd lived? What if he hadn't have gone to Spain and contracted that disease? Might he have held France a little bit longer, strengthened the position of the English crown? Maybe he'd have raised his son, Richard, differently, and the chaos under Richard II, the peasants' revolt, would have been avoided. It's interesting, isn't it? Might he have avoided decades of instability, reducing the likelihood of the Wars of the Roses? My goodness me. Or might his financial recklessness and his heavy-handed way that he used to rule sometimes have brought new instabilities and troubles of their own? What are your thoughts on the subject? Answers on a postcard, or if you like, put them in the comments below. There's one thing for certain, though. The Black Prince, Edward, Prince of Wales, certainly left his mark on history. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video, as if you did, like, share and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel further, why not have a look at joining our Patreon community? The link is in the description, and it just so happens this video was voted in by our Patreon members. Now, before I go, a quick shout out. So, hey guys, Stuart Walker, Steve Fisher and Katie Mixon. Hey guys, thanks a million. Without you, we wouldn't be able to do these films. So, bye for now.